everybody. I'm Keith. I'm one of the organizers of the API Meetup here. If you found us, that's a good sign. If you want to find us online, we're Austin API on Twitter and austinapi.com, which just redirects to the Meetup group. But if you're here, you probably know one of those two things. So welcome. Few quick things. This is the first Meetup I've been to here in like 6 months. So I'm sorry for my absence. We had a baby. So I was kind of biased. You had a baby too?
No, I didn't have a baby too. It's been about that long since I've been here.
So actually, show of hands, who's never been to an API Meetup here before? All right, fantastic. Welcome, guys and ladies. Welcome. It's great having you guys here. So one of the things that we try to do with this meetup is we are very technology agnostic. We don't care what your background is. We don't care what your role is. We just want to come up with tools and concepts and principles and sort of things that help you build APIs better, use APIs better, whatever the case may be. And actually, on that note, who here works for a company that primarily builds APIs? Anybody? What APIs?
PayPal.
PayPal. You should. What else?
It's all Harmon.
Rackspace. Bizarre Voice. What else? Oh, I'm with Clarify. If you hadn't guessed already. Yeah. Okay, so who primarily uses APIs? Okay, which ones?
Clarify. PayPal. That's relevance. Well,
You're like the plant here, aren't you?
lots of them.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah. You should. Anybody else using APIs regularly? Okay, who's never used an API before at all? Come on. All right, welcome. That's awesome that you came anyway. It takes a lot of courage to step into a group that you're not familiar with, and congrats, welcome. Let's see, before we get going, announcements.
It's a quiet summer.
It's a quiet summer. It's summer, so it's a little bit cooler than we have had in the past years. One good thing is the API Strategy Conference will be here this fall. They don't have a date as far as I know, right? No date?
Still no dates.
Still no date. So that's a conference organized by Freescale. They've done it in San Francisco, Chicago, Amsterdam, Berlin. This fall it'll be here. So it's usually October, November timeframe. They're still settling that. It's a great opportunity. One of the things that we did to help try and bring it here in the first place is we called out to them and they said, hey, look, here are all the API companies doing cool things in Austin. So when the conference actually comes here, we need to have a showing in force to say, hey, look, we're a community, we get APIs, we're doing cool stuff, come back. Other than that, what else? Is that it?
I think that's it.
That's it. Yeah,
Let's get that cool T-shirt.
This is a match-shape shirt.
So with that, I'll go ahead and hand this off to Jason, if you've seen him online. Yeah, there's a few groans. That's deserved. So Jason is with PayPal, and you do stuff with the API, and you make bits move back and forth, and you take money.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, that was a pretty shitty introduction, but you'll forgive me. Hopefully. If not, thank you for coming this one time. And with that, then you take it.
All right, so it's a little weird talking at the meetup that I'm usually helping organize, but it's been a while, so I thought it was a good time to kind of reconnect with you guys and share a little bit about what I've been doing for the last year and a half. Not really in tons of detail, but as you'll see, it's kind of the collection of bits that I've found over the course of doing the job there. So I worked with PayPal the last year and a half or so. I'm working these days a little bit more with Braintree, a company that we acquired, kind of a smaller startup. So back to my comfort zone. Not really that good at being a big company guy, but I play along well. Done a bit of blogging here and there. I started this YouTube thing back in February, and I have gobs of videos sitting around waiting to be edited. So at some point that'll become a real thing. I'm just waiting until I find my groove. But so my job at PayPal is kind of this, right? So it's basically we have a process for any APIs being developed in the company, and there's kind of a broad initiative over the last year and a half to sort of go from the hodgepodge of what they had into sort of this REST API form, both internal and external. So there's a REST API for PayPal now, which didn't have before about 2 years ago. But that's only about maybe 3% of the total of what we've done. So the team that I have within that group has looked at every API that's come through. So we've seen every silly thing you can imagine, because a lot of those developers have never even used a REST API, they've never built one, they don't know what good looks like. So my Evernote is full of all these little notes of where I see stuff and I go like, why would you do that? Let me just grab that and snag that. And so I've been slowly but surely, that's part of like the YouTube thing too, is like trying to figure out how to share very negative things in terms of saying that was silly, why did you think of that? But put it in a productive way. Like there's a solution to these problems. So hopefully that's what we'll get through. So we'll start fairly easy, and these are things that I think apply to not just APIs, but to a lot of things. It's like kind of mixed up conventions. It's super easy to do. When you're like laying out how an API works, you just sneak in an extra query parameter and you forget, oh yeah, we use spine case and I throw it in there camel case. So what it boils down to, like people say, well, what's the best one? What should I use for my URLs? What should I use for my query parameters? What should I use for my headers, whatever? It doesn't really matter. I mean, there's many arguments on all sides, and I think there's lots of valid arguments. Some of it depends on what your developer community looks like. In reality, pick something and stick with it. So that one's pretty easy. We all get that, right? Consistent conventions are good. Why? Because when you're writing code, it's nice to always have a predictable way to look at it, right? The next one is parameter confusion. It's kind of what I call it. That the idea that, well, I got this API and it kind of works, but I need to pass some extra piece of data with it. So I'm going to just like throw an extra header in there, or I'm going to throw an extra query string in there to do this extra thing I need to do, without really thinking about like what are those supposed to be used for? What is the typical convention, right? So I've kind of put together like this is the way I think about it, about parameters in general. And so it's a little sketchy to put one list of rules. Clearly when you're doing like get and retrieval kind of stuff, it's a little different than creating things or updating things with like post, put, or patch. But essentially, the most important piece is what is in the path is required. So if you put something in a query string, by the HTTP spec, it shouldn't be required in general. I mean, there's some weird rules to that, but in general, that's kind of how it goes. So if you put it in the path, here's the reality. If they screw it up, they get a 404. It's easy feedback, right? So if you try to put it in a query string, now you got to give them some 400 and try to explain what they did wrong or that they didn't provide it. 404 kind of says you didn't find the thing that you were looking for in the first place. So putting parameter values that you're trying to pass in the path is essentially a way of saying this is a required parameter. Query string or query parameters, those are optional. And essentially, if you're thinking about I'm retrieving a thing that's a collection of things, I'm going to filter that collection. That's kind of the best case for that. Granted, there are plenty of others, but in general, again, when you're doing like geolocation or something weird, things get different, but by and large, those things don't come up in business as often. And then when you're dealing with kind of your business logic, what are the things that you need to pass to do work, right? Those go in the request body, in typically your JSON or XML or whatever format your clients are comfortable with. And then the headers, I like to think of those as like reserved for platform use. So if you're doing something that applies to every API, or you want it to have the potential to apply to every API that you offer, put it in a header. And part of the reasoning to this is that it gives you an easy place to look for consistently that works everywhere on every call, that you can instrument more easily. Query parameters, URLs, it's a little harder to kind of, it's just, there's so many permutations to how different APIs will do it. Doing a header is, if you kind of block that off as no one gets to pass headers without, sticking to the rules, it's a lot easier to say this applies to everything. And if you look at how HTTP works, that's kind of the way it's written. So if you look at like the accept header where you say, I'm going to pass accept and tell you what content type I can accept on a response. That's always the same in every HTTP call you do everywhere. So that's kind of the way that headers are intended to be used. It's like, think of it like a global variable. Making sense? That's me heads nodding, a little boring, most of it reviewed for most of you. For those who have touched APIs, sorry. That's a couple not listening, I'm trying. Another one, what I call the JSON junk drawer. This is the most surprising one that came up way more often in the last year or two than I thought it would, is the idea that I can just create like a key value pair and stick it in some kind of field, some kind of object, and basically say, well, I'm not going to put much in my API, but I'm going to create this key value pair collection that anytime later that I want to add something, I can add it, and it'll be okay. And so it's kind of, some of it leads back to like XML thinking. There's some of that going on in there in terms of the way people used XML. But it's this idea that I won't break compatibility. And the problem is that if you try to go use these fields, they're difficult to actually use because first of all, you have to deal with an array right off the bat. So now you're looping through an array trying to find the right key, which works kind of good in some languages and kind of not good in others. Sometimes you have to go use the library to make that work better. So this is a weird one, but that was the first video that I did for the YouTube thing to try to pick something hard, which turned out way too long, so it's good. Sorry. There are some applicable scenarios that I've sort of tried to pick out of walking through that video. And it's basically that if your client gets to define the fields, then it's okay. So if like one of the scenarios that I brought up is like a bug tracking system, where you're like putting all the bugs, but then you want to be able to put in your own IDs back to some internal system. We won't know what the field name is as the provider of the API. So the client gets to define the field names themselves. That's where that sort of key value pair stuff works. But as a server, the provider, to say that I'm going to use these key value pairs so that I don't have to change the contract is a horrible developer experience for people that have to use it. Basically, like, just add the field. Yeah.
On the user defined, are they defining them on the request?
Yeah, so typically that would be like, you go to post to create some resource, and you would, instead of just like, sticking a field that the server doesn't know about, you would like add some extra key value thing in there.
You have to sanitize those values?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other problem is like the question of how do you deal with untyped string stuff. It's trickier to use because everybody's converting types and it gets weird. So basically, the kind of contravariance and covariance, does anybody know what those mean? Thank you. I didn't either. I was having this guy teach the class that I've been teaching at PayPal, and he like explained this to me, but he's like some computer scientist professor guy. I totally didn't know what it meant, but it's basically the idea of backward compatibility, that you can add stuff to the response, it's fine. You can add fields, it's okay. You don't have to worry about using this key value pair thing. On the request, you can add fields, but they have to be optional. So be compatible, but don't use key value pairs to maintain compatibility as a general rule that you start with. It's a bad pattern. All right, these are more interesting, I swear. I know those are all weird or easy. So sequential identifiers. This one I'm like a total stickler about. So the idea is I go to create an API, and my favorite thing to pick on is these frameworks where you can just like say, I want to create an API, point it at a database, and I get a free API. And all the IDs for it are your Oracle or SQL Server or whatever IDs. And what's the problem with that? You can just keep adding numbers and try them all, even if there's ones you're not supposed to get to. And I'll explain a little bit more about why I don't believe that's a good strategy. But basically, yeah.
Can I share one note on this?
Yeah, please.
So I want to clarify, we're in the API space, and there's a number of companies that when they publish their APIs, they go with this by default, which seems like a good, easy idea. One cool thing you can do though is on Monday, go create an account, look at your user ID, come back the following Monday, create a new account, look at your new user ID, and now you know how fast they're growing.
Yeah.
There's fun thing to do.
Like from the sort of business intelligence side, there's actually a lot you can learn from sequential identifiers from a competitor just by looking at their sequential identifiers. But think like a hacker that's trying to get into stuff, and it actually opens up a lot of other options too. So I'm not just saying this. There's like over a decade of evidence. Does anybody keep up with the OWASP top 10? Jesus, it's terrifying how few that answer is yes. The same is true like
So what is it?
It's the open. I'm gonna tell.
Alright.
It's the Open Web Application Security Project. I'm not like dogging on anyone. It's just I had to do like PCI stuff for a long time, and it's like a big thing. So it basically is a project of industry professionals who get together every couple of years and put together what they think are the top 10 exploits in web applications, which certainly like APIs are web apps, even though when you think web app, you probably think browsers and mobile phones. It's a web app too. So in that top 10 list, since I want to say 2004, 2003, insecure direct object reference has been in there. And this is the notion that if you provide some URL to let people get to things, and they provide maybe a token for authenticating, you trust that your developers are smart enough to build this API to say, well, I'm not going to let you get to that URL you tried to get to because you don't have access to it. And the evidence of looking at OWASP says we suck at that. Like, as developers, we suck at constraining resources. So the reality is, the more often that you can, with these sequential identifiers, don't do them because it makes it way too easy to try them all. If you use some sort of, like, typically UUIDs, there are environments where that's a problem. I know PayPal's one. So you can come up with other algorithms to produce an alphanumeric string. And the reason is the mathematical permutations of things that you have to try them all is so much higher that if somebody tries to do that, they're going to stick out like a sore thumb on your traffic if you're watching your traffic. So if somebody's pulling through trying 13 million combinations, it's going to show up a lot faster than it would if you're sequentially trying things that should theoretically exist. With this, most of the results will be things that don't exist. So that kind of segues us really nicely into the next one, which is, and I did this originally for a German crowd, so sorry, it's weird that I used the German ID, I know, but is the idea of passing identity in URLs. And this, I think, I got the most grumbles and glares when I did this in a bigger room, because a lot of APIs do this. You just pass some, token or identity construct in the URL. And so that might look like, query string user token equals blah, or it may be /users, / whatever the ID is, / the rest of your things. Why is that bad? Because all the things I said before are not true about your whole user database. Somebody can go try and poke at all the different users in your system, all the different identities, let's say, because it may not be user, it may be account or whatever else, whatever your identity construct is. If you think ahead a little bit about logs and things, headers don't usually get logged. URLs do, like by default in every web server. So that means if somebody gets to your logs, but never compromises your application servers, they can potentially have a database of every ID that exists for your users. Versus by default, headers don't get logged, and that doesn't happen. All right, so keeping identity out of URLs is like a fundamental should do if you have a secured system. Yeah.
But you also mentioned in the previous one, headers, you use it for something which is global or across.
Right.
What if my resource is not that? I have like.
Meaning you need to sign in, you need to use that resource as different users?
The user ID, right? If it's common, I can set it in a header, right?
Yeah, you can definitely still try them all, so you shouldn't use sequential identifiers either. And really you should be using some sort of expiring token. That's the best case, rather than like a static value. So here, I'll just move forward while we're talking about headers for auth. Yeah, I mean, you generally don't want to pass anything about identity explicitly in your call, other than something that's hopefully time expiring. So like I'm passing a token, like typically when you call OAuth 2 stuff, you pass like a bearer token, right? That token, some APIs will give you like super long-lived access. Their security constraints might not be that high. I mean, I work in payments, so it's kind of an important thing. So, I mean, we actually do some long-lived tokens in some situations too, but it's usually lower volume. So the point here is that if you go and read through HTTP RFCs, by candlelight with a glass of wine at dinner, like some of us.
Don't look at me.
I thought I was the only one.
Basically, what you glean from it is auth is actually fairly narrowly defined. It's to say pass authorization in the authorization header. That's like kind of the broad way, and that's all it says. So you can pass kind of whatever you want in there, but there's a bucket for passing authorization, which, it's kind of authentication, I know, but in other words, you're authorized to call the thing you must have authenticated. Ultimately, it's typically some token, expired or not. Try not to pass the actual identity in that header, and try not to pass it anywhere else but that header. That's what I'm getting at. And that concept is super common violated, even in very public popular APIs.
So that's for authenticating a user. What if you have a user with a public profile and you want to get their profile?
Yeah.
So no authentication there.
Definitely different thing. Yeah.
Okay. I think that might have been what you were. That's I think what you were talking
So
about.
like your Twitter, right? Like that's actually a perfectly acceptable case to me. Other than the sequential identifier, I know there are people on Twitter who totally regret that decision from a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, they want their data to be discoverable about users. But if you look at the data that you can get about your own account versus the data that you get about others, it's constrained by a huge amount. Right? So by exposing that sort of manipulable parameter in the URL, you've cut down the scope of data significantly. So if you go that route, it's specifically for providing visibility. But yeah, I mean, sorry, I think I've been working in authenticated APIs so long, I do tend to glaze over those cases. You're absolutely right. So I already mentioned it before, logs is kind of all these things we talked about with sequential identifiers, with identity paths and URLs, all that stuff. Like, just think about logs and think about the fact that there are scenarios where things end up in logs that you don't own. There's a variety of ways that can happen. But ultimately, anything passed in the URL or in query strings is at much higher risk of being logged somewhere than headers. So put the secure things in headers. So it's like, this gets a little anxious, right? We're looking at all these like scary, like, oh crap, did I totally, but like most of this stuff's pretty easy fixes, and actually a lot of it you can do in place. So you can have like 2 different identifiers for the same resource. You can say like, before we pass it as a sequential number, now we're gonna pass it as this alphanumeric string. And we can do both for a little while and then deprecate the number. But you don't necessarily have to redesign your whole API. So if you think about it, most of this isn't like horrible, terrible changes, but they're things that if you're building something new, you should be thinking about in advance, and it'll like save you a lot of hanging down with it. So capturing some of these not to-dos, I think a lot of people struggle with like, all right, well, I like maybe build one API, and what am I going to do to stop this from proliferating as we grow as a company? Like, how are we going to keep this from happening everywhere? I say create standards, you know, make rules, stick to them, which sounds trite. I mean, so within PayPal, we work with a community of about 6,000 developers, 1,000 to 2,000 of whom have been building APIs in the last year or two actively. So scaling that is like been the absolute lesson out of the whole thing, and I don't think we got it perfect at all. But like, if I could start from scratch, you could do it really good. So that's my hope, is share with you guys kind of like some of the things that we did, which is a lot of this, but then also some of the things that getting a reboot I'm kind of starting to do again. But one little thing I would also say is, if you do write down standards, you do say, this is how we pass parameters, this is how we pass authentication, whatever, you write it down for your team, go share it, please. Like, part of the reason that it's a chaotic landscape is nobody shares how they do it. So if you've built an API before, or you've thought about it, what's the first thing you do? I'm gonna go look at Facebook, I'm gonna go look at Twitter, I'm gonna go look at Twilio, I'm gonna go look at wherever, like popular APIs, and try to like glean from my place of no knowledge, how did they do this thing? Like, how does this work? And you're gonna make mistakes. So if more folks are sharing their API standards, or like I did, we took a big monstrous body of standards that people begged for, don't know why I want so many rules, and whittle it down to a vignette, something simple, a couple of pages you can quickly grasp. Heroku also does this, the White House does this. I know, weird, the White House. There's not many examples of where people have shared this, so I've been trying to kind of push people, like, if you're writing it down internally, sanitize it of your internal information, stick it on a public GitHub and share it.
Are these going to be public?
This is right now.
Oh.
Yeah, I put it out.
I'm sorry,
Couple
your
months ago.
slide.
Steve actually put it out because I was stuck in
No, you're
training.
talking about slides.
I got the
Oh, the
slide.
slides,
I'm
yeah.
getting ready to write a long URL, but I know I'll have one mistake. Please.
Yeah, I'll definitely share it.
And if you tweet it, we'll retweet it from the Austin API Twitter account.
Mhm.
So it should be on there.
I'll put it on my SlideShare too. If you find any of my
SlideShare
identity, you'll find your way
in the
back.
Meetup thing for B.
There you go.
It's the
Cool.
lowest content name for B.
Fair enough. All right, so now the question is, we've defined standards, we've written it down, we have some rules that everybody maybe agrees to stick to, maybe some people don't agree with the group that put these together. That happens all day. So how do we make this real? right? For most of us that are involved in like agile and continuous development and deployment stuff, like if it's not in GitHub committed and then called from CI, it's not real. So hopefully we can think of like this sort of design first type process. And I put this chicken and egg up here. I forgot to mention earlier, I have a thing with slide decks of trying to always use Wikimedia images so that I don't have to bother with the image credits at the end. And when I searched for design first, I got all this stuff with like chicken and egg, but none of them were from Wikimedia. I'm not sure why that's a good debate or why it's reasonable. And most chicken and egg things are like some evolutionary versus like biological thing. Anyways, the point is like some people will say, build it first and then extract your design. Others will say like, design it first and then go build it. To me, there's really no debate to it. When you look at a healthy process, start to finish, you want to design first on your API, knowing a few simple things about design thinking, right? The idea, and this is where I think like as engineers, we are pretty bad culturally at understanding that designers are doing the same damn thing we're doing. They're just doing it with different language. So I think like sharing the language between the two communities is really helpful. One is that we're building APIs, they're machine to machine, but who writes the code to use them? Humans. So we apply the human rule from design thinking. There's the ambiguity rule, which is like, when you're sitting down to design your API, don't put too many rules to it. Let things be a little chaotic. It's okay, because we're always redesigning. And you'll see why the earlier we do that, the better we get. But if we start off with super constrained rules, use cases I call them, and we go with this laser focus on particular things, we ignore serendipity, the things that we didn't think about. So the sooner that we play with it, get feedback, and iterate, the better way to think. And then tangibility. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more about how do I take this abstract API design that's a headless thing that no one but the developers wants to look at and make that something that we can play with. And just kind of, I don't know, we don't have to go into detail on this one, but these are the things you should be thinking about. When people say developer experience, does anybody hear that term at work or around? Do you think of anything but a developer portal when people say that? In my experience, that's becoming what that means, and I think it misses a huge part of the discussion. Because we're sitting down to build the API, who are we building it for? We're building it for developers. So we need to understand our audience's thoughts, desires, beliefs, and actions. What are they going to do with this thing? How are they going to write code to use it? And think about that. In fact, maybe write some code, right? So, these are some of the things that we should be thinking about as designers of APIs. And it's okay if you say designer, it doesn't make you a bad engineer. Yes?
How about enforcement tools?
Get there. Totally know where you're going. So a lot of people are starting to call this concept spec-driven development. It's the idea that we write an API spec, and then we kind of go through this iterative cycle to build it. We're going to head down a bumpy road here for a minute. I'll be saying this is not quite there yet a lot. And my hope is some of you will take inspiration and join open source projects that are doing these things. If you're into Swagger, you can join mine. Somebody actually bought me that stamp. That's why I included that image, because I thought it was hilarious. They were mocking me for...
Ramel.
Yeah, sorry, I should have called that when I said
Ramel and-
specs. I mean Swagger, Ramel, API Blueprint. Those are sort of the most common formats for describing APIs. Those are the sort of simple text formats out there that we can use to describe what our requests and responses and URLs and all that stuff looks like. We've covered that in this meetup quite a bit already. If you haven't been here, that's okay. Go search for those terms. You will find gobs of information. There's lots out there.
What was the third one again?
API Blueprint, that's Apiary's thing. Each of these is kind of shepherded by a company at this point. So Smart Bear is Swagger, Ramel is MuleSoft, and API Blueprint is Apiary. All equally interesting in very different ways. Although they all do fundamentally the same thing, they just have G little edges to them. So let's think about the steps we're going to go through. If we're going to start from scratch and we're going to design our API first, we're going to come up with the spec, right? We're going to say, here's my URLs. So you're going to debate that for years, and somebody's eventually going to point out that like REST doesn't actually prescribe URLs. You're just mocking the way that Ruby works. But whatever. Come up with a convention that you like about how you're going to build your URLs, and I won't go into it. Come up with what your requests and your responses look like, what data format you're going to use, all those things. Write it down. And that's where we're just starting. So that's going to feel, if you do this, you're going to feel like, God, we spent a lot of time and I haven't written any code. What are we doing? You're gaining a lot of collaborative value in hashing out your sort of HTTP interactions before you've actually spent any money on code. You don't have anything to refactor. You're just changing a text file for the most part. So this part, we're heading into kind of a chasm, warning. This is something I've been working on lately, is the idea that, and actually within PayPal, we've done this fairly well. It took a long time to build it, but we're working on it in some other places too, is the idea that we can sort of provide that standard stuff that we wrote down. We can make that code, and anytime somebody writes an API spec, we check that against our standards. We validate that that spec, that all the URLs use the proper convention. Did you do camel case or spine case or whatever? Your query parameters, your request and response bodies, that all the fields and all those JSON objects or YAML or whatever you're using, that they all match the conventions. So you can get about 80–85% of the conventions that you've enforced in your standards in there. The things that'll get you are like word boundaries, where like, you can write that, please let me borrow it. So there's a lot you kind of still have to skim, but if you can narrow all that out, you're really talking about the subjective things, which is great. Like, you're not wasting your time on the things that are machine automatable. I'm starting work on a thing for Swagger to do this, like a spec that you can actually prescribe what your conventions are, what your allowed values in certain fields, all that. The idea being that if you have 150 teams building different APIs, you can provide one script or put something in CI that automatically checks them all. And that way you don't have to look through them as somebody who maybe is some sort of API governance function, or maybe a committee or whatever other version of governance you have. So I think this is an incredible opportunity right now to like completely accelerate what a lot of people have struggled with in terms of consistency. And there's not much out there.
When you said CI, that's continuous integration.
Yes, continuous integration, CI, sorry.
I'm sorry, that was, naming that was Swagger.
Yeah, Swagger is one. That's the one I'm working with right now.
And what's the date you expect that there would be a mature tool?
Mature, I don't know. I'll probably have something cobbled together here in the next few weeks. I'll stick it in my GitHub account. I'm sure I'll tweet about it. I'm just convincing some of our nude guys at PayPal to help me write a good GitHub node.
You had a handle with J on it. That was the third one.
JJRMN.
JJ.
Yep. So the other piece is, now that you've designed your API, the question is, are there folks within the company that are going to use it? So this might be, you're building APIs for your mobile developers, you're building them for your web application developers, whatever. You can start out really small and get away with just like send a like Slack to somebody, hey, the design's ready, go look at it. What you're really going to want is a way, because what those guys are going to do is look at your Swagger file or your RAML file, and they're going to say, like, I can't read this. I haven't looked at this before. This isn't something I'm comfortable with. You're going to want a UI sit on top of that. And the good news is all these popular formats provide sort of freebie viewers. And you can think of it as like your shoestring developer portal. And in fact, a lot of the APIs that you go use and you hit like the try it button or you look through all the APIs, that's all using these sort of freebie front ends that people have customized. So drop that in front of it. And in fact, what I've been doing lately is just stick like the Swagger UI is what I've been using. Stick it in like a GH Pages branch on your GitHub if you're using that. And you kind of get like a free web app out of it. You can just point it to the Swagger file and master branch. Like you can go incredibly cheap on this. I'm talking like 2 hours. So it's not a massive investment to provide a way to look at your design and in fact get sample responses too. So if we're that far along now, your client developers, your mobile guys, your web app developers are looking at this design and they're kind of trying to think about it. But how often have you read docs and then gone off and written code, and when you're done, you finish and you say, that worked exactly like I thought it did. Like never, right? That never happened.
Once and
Okay,
afraid.
all right, tech writer not fair. You have a different ability to read than anybody who codes. That's why you are important.
That was just fantastic.
Yeah.
When it does work, you're afraid to totally doubt yourself.
You know,
That
you
can't be
just-
right, that's gotta be wrong.
Yeah,
you
if it's that
something.
easy, it's true. Like those are rare occasions where like, something's that easy, but it's usually like insanely easy usage kind of things. So the answer to that is we'll do a mock. So we'll have a fake API that answers on the same URLs, maybe not the same host name, but like the same path and query parameters and headers and all that stuff. We'll have it answer the same way that it would if you used it wherever it's going to live in your live environment. And that way you can hand that immediately over and in fact, potentially link to it from your little cheapy developer portal you slapped together, or maybe a really nice one. And those client developers are going to get to go actually call the API and write code against it. Like, you ever heard like curl it or it didn't happen? Like, people say that a lot in APIs. So you can curl this, like it's real, but it's fake responses. But remember earlier we talked about tactile feedback being an important aspect of design? The quality of feedback you get from a mock versus docs is like orders of magnitude. It's a huge difference because as developers, we need to feel the code. You know, we kind of have to get that tactile feedback of calling the thing. The mock just raises that up so good.
We did this to start building our helper libraries.
Really? Yep, so good. And so if you think about that like a cycle, we can kind of pause right there and just go back where we started, redesign a little bit. Remember I said we're always redesigning? Change that spec in 2 or 3 minutes after a long discussion. And then those same devs can go back and try the same thing and get exactly what they asked for. Again, a fake response, but get more tactile feedback and kind of go, yep, this is going to work for me. You might need to do that 5 or 6 times. And it's going to feel like, oh, when are we going to get to code this API? But that's super worth it because it's actually a cheap cycle to do, and you can kind of do it in off cycles. And then you get to actually code something. You have to go build stuff. And another area where I think like we need a lot of development, I think the PHP community does a good job with this. And I want to say Node, there's something. But basically the idea that I'm building this API, and some folks use CodeGen, where you'll point at your Swag or your RAML or whatever with some executable that'll spit out code. But I've yet to meet a team that's comfortable using that because most of us are really picky about what our code looks like and we don't want to use somebody else's out-of-gen code. Some teams have, and that's okay, but what I've sort of shifted toward, and certainly what we do a fair bit of at PayPal is like look at the spec as the way that we validate requests. It's not the only validation, but if you're already defining every field in your request and potentially every field in your response, you can actually validate that too. You've got sort of a schema that you can use now to actually, it's typically JSON schema is what folks will use. There's other approaches, but you can take that and actually validate it against the incoming request and very cheaply get, hey, here's the request included an incorrect type. It was a number when it should have been a string, or the value was too high or too low if it's a fixed constraint, or the enum that was passed didn't exist. You get all that stuff really fairly cheaply. There's not a lot of great library support. This is a great area we should be pushing on hard. There's actually some things that do this. The good news is most of it's just JSON schema validation at the end of the day. Getting it to map into Swagger or RAML or Blueprint is the tricky part. Then validating that design. I think this is like, you can take the other 2 things where I said things are a little sketchy and kind of get away with it. You can handwrite your validation code in your API. You could probably get away without some of these other things, but if you've spec'd out what you're going to build up front, you've all agreed to it, and then the API team goes off and goes, yeah, that's nice, I'm going to build whatever I want. And then they deploy it, and you don't know that it doesn't match the spec. Suddenly you're getting reports from the field that, hey, why did, this looks crappy. I thought you guys did better work than this. You go, wait, we all agreed this is the design. Yeah, well, you didn't stop me. So, and again, you got 3 guys, like it's fine, you can throw a beer bottle at somebody, but you got a bigger community, it's harder to keep track of. So if you're not acceptance testing your APIs, you should be. And if you just look for like API BDD testing, I've talked a lot about this. I'm really, really big on it. Because it gives you a way, and anybody heard of BDD, behavioral driven design? Okay. It's basically saying you can describe your tests in English and then use that to map into some sort of code that actually executes, again, in your continuous integration environment where every time someone changes code, tests run. The key here is this layer of testing is not unit testing. It's not integration testing. It's a thing that runs and lives that calls your API as a client with a human description of the behavior you expect the client to do. There are other approaches out there for API testing, and if you're doing those, great. If you're not like writing a client that calls your API before you push it out, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So as part of that, you should be thinking about, hey, I have a spec that describes what my response should look like. I have a test client that's calling this API. I should be validating this, giving me what it said that it was going to give me. And so you've got this schema defined in your Swagger RAML blueprint that gives you a way to capture that schema, capture the response, and validate them against each other. So hopefully I have another open source thing on this. That one may be long, because I'll probably go through official channels. But this is super powerful stuff. And then you get to go live. And I've already said CI a lot, so clearly I think it's important if you're not doing CI. So we've done all that hard work. We've designed up front. We built our API. We deployed it. We validated every step along the way. And as I said before, there are subjective things. There are human factors. There are realities. So you can't just say works as designed, right? That's the Titanic if you want to under construction. Like you can screw it up. There's nothing about REST. There's nothing about Swagger or RAML or anything else that's going to stop you from producing a bad design that doesn't work for the people that use it. So it's still on you to pay attention to the folks who can use it, pay attention to the scenarios that it's going to be used in, the networks it's going to be used in, all those different things. But hopefully this process will allow you to scale up from a small operation. These aren't all things you maybe can afford to do day one, but they're things you should be putting on the roadmap to start getting in place so that as you're building more and more APIs across a bigger organization, assuming you're going down some microservices route, if you're like a diehard monolith guy, you can punch me afterwards, that's fine. Once you reach some certain scale, you're going to have a number of things running around in different services. It's hard to keep track of, and it's hard to get everybody to play by the same rules. So like use specs up front, do a few validation steps, some CI stuff in there, life's a lot easier. That is all I got. Questions? Yeah. They go really fast. That was good. What's up, Jake?
Question mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So maintaining concurrent versions of CI tested things is usually a CI problem, right? Like how are you going to validate these concurrent versions that are running out there? If you're not doing breaking changes, you can probably get away with just testing the current one and be okay. If you're going to do some more advanced versioning thing, passing a header, or maybe you just pass a URL that you change every 9, 12 months, whatever, you're going to have separate testing schemes for those two things, period. Like, they're not the same product, right? All right.
What would you say to the engineer who says, our users won't care if there's an anti-pattern, they're only going to care that it works?
Yeah, I think that's true to an extent. So like if, let's say, I'll pick on PayPal for an example. If you say like day one, I need to just go, set up a payment between 2 accounts. Like it's an easy case, I can do it in one call, it's no big deal, or I can send a money request, let's say. But the problem is the more you get engaged with an API's sort of platform, the more APIs you start using, the more that as a client developer, you're going to want to start to kind of dry that code up and not just have URLs and config files everywhere and little exceptional rules everywhere. You're going to kind of want to have one way that you deal with that given API, maybe one way that you optimize your serialization to improve your performance, a way that you parse the URLs to do some more sophisticated things with it. Although, arguably shouldn't parse URLs, they always do. So the more not sure I'd get a grunt out of that over here. The more predictable that things are, the more that people can grow into your sort of ecosystem of APIs and not feel like they've stepped into a dark corner that no one cared about. Is it a barrier to adoption to have like a few fields that don't match up? Probably not, but I don't think it sends the best signals to an educated customer. It's kind of like you go to buy a car and there's a fender that's, got a 1-inch gap between the fender and the door. Like, will it sell because it drives well? Sure. Does it give a great customer experience? Probably not. And your sales may drop over time because of it. So, and it's again, like, you can kind of get away with that in a smaller pocket of things and saying like, we have 3 public APIs and one of them is a little janky. Okay, like you'd probably be fine. But if you're re-platforming your whole system or building a whole system with, dozens of APIs, your own developers that are the clients of those are going to need that kind of consistency, or they're going to hate whoever built all those APIs if they're all different. Because they can't, what they really need to do is build one client that interoperates with all of them. And also think about that most of your developer communities are immediately, the first question they're going to ask is, where's the library? How do I call this with some sort of SDK? And so, your reaction would be like, why do I need all this convention and consistency crap? I can cover that all with my dirty little SDK blanket. The problem is now your SDK developers have to own that. And it's not very fun. They're all going to hate each other. So, it's just, if you've ever worked with anybody that like works in SDKs, for instance, every little inconsistency drives them totally bananas. So anybody that knows APIs at all, and if you talk to most folks in startups now, they're calling 10, 15 different APIs just to get things spun up because they don't want to do things they're not good at. They'd rather just buy that. They're going to quickly notice which ones stick out as these guys didn't really care. They didn't really think about it. And they're going to start looking at your competitors as an optional commodity. Yep.
So what do you think about supporting multiple content types in your response, right? Sending back the same thing in JSON and XML.
Sure. That's what that's what the accept field is there for in your get, and your content type is there for in your post specialty, right? It's fine. Nothing wrong with it. So as far as like speccing it out, chances are you're going to pick one that you talk about internally. And then within your testing, if you want to be really careful, then you're probably going to have your tests run with some variable that you pass in through your CI or whatever that changes that accept header on every, or content type on your updates and creates. Have that change and basically have a loop of tests that run to try out all the different content types. But fundamentally, the design should be the same concepts involved. You might have to maintain different schemas somewhere.
So I think it's acceptable, like if somebody asks me, what, I want the same response, not in JSON, but in XML. I think it's the...
Well, number one, that won't be the same response. And I know I'm being facetious. The point is that if you've ever tried to map like JSON objects directly to XML, it's not a nice, tidy, perfect mapping. Things will be a little bit different. But yeah, that shouldn't be an issue. Sorry if I was supposed to answer the other way and give you an excuse to go back and tell people you can do that. But
now I have to do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's generous. The thing is, like, if you're writing JSON and you have customers that are asking for XML, ask if you can spend time with their developers and explain JSON to them. That's kind of the whole like developer community and support thing, is like making people comfortable with new things that aren't that new anymore. Now, if you're going to YAML and they're asking you for JSON, I would tell you maybe you're being a little pushy, but yeah, they're probably asking for XML. You have JSON now. Yeah, they're just not comfortable with newer things, and it's not that new now. That was new like a decade ago. So, yeah, has to spend time with them, unless they're paying you a whole lot of money and then build the XML and be quiet. Yeah, I mean, we have, I don't know how many developers anymore, like hundreds of thousands or something, using the Takeout stuff, and it's all JSON. And I mean, maybe they ask, and maybe we can afford to tell them no, I don't know. But most folks don't do XML anymore. More?
Any thoughts on like Hypermedia in an API?
So The trouble in this discussion with Hypermedia is that the spec formats are not great at supporting most of the Hypermedia constructs. APGA apparently added something a couple months ago that I still have yet to spend any time looking at into Blueprint, the API Blueprint. They supposedly have some sort of Hypermedia thing in there. I think it depends on what flavor of at its simplest, Hypermedia, if you think I'm talking about web links, like I kind of am, right? It's a way of linking your APIs together. There are at least 4 or 5 different sort of strong competing standards for how to do this, and a wide variety of other not so leading standards. And the leading ones make up like 1% of the API world, right? It's a very bleeding edge thing. Keith's a brave guy by living with one. Very, very great. But as such, the spec formats, I mean, I was on one of the working groups for RAML, and then I worked with a guy who was on the Swagger one, and in both groups, everybody just kind of said, like, this is still a little too scary to pin down to how to do it. It's just not abundantly clear yet. So I'm not against it fundamentally at all. I mean, all APIs have, very simplistic Hypermedia concepts, and then there's links in the responses.
Do you use the link header for that mostly, or?
No, it's actually part of the representation. So if you look, we just use a simple structure that's actually pretty easy to describe in our sort of JSON schema. So we're able to actually kind of keep track of them. The problem is when you see, this is the real problem, is like in a spec format, you're going to say, all right, I'm going to expose my Hypermedia engine of state, right? My state machine in my system is going to be exposed in my API. What happens to your spec is it becomes the description of your state machine in order to make it accurate. And nobody really needs that. They kind of just need to learn to follow the links. So it kind of becomes a question of what samples do you need to provide? And this is where like multiple samples are also not supported well in most spec formats. But that's something that a lot of folks glue on top of this in their developer portals, is the ability to say, here's what I'm trying to do, show me a sample for it. And what happens is developers learn that, oh, in this scenario, I'm going to get these kind of links with this rel or this title or whatever you're calling it. And they learn that that's the thing that I look for to go to the next step. And so it's sort of learning the state machine by feel rather than learning an entire state machine of all the permutations that can happen, because most people just play with one edge of it.
So as a newbie, if you're building a brand new API, what tools would you use from start to finish? Now that you've had experience.
So this is probably the one thing that I can say, talking about spec formats, that's true in almost any environment. All the other stuff is probably depending upon what sort of code you're using.
Postman.
Postman, yeah, I mean, there's that's debatable too. There's a lot of options now.
Can we use this as a jump off to the next thing? Cool, thank you.
So one of the things I always want to do with this group is use as an opportunity as basically an extended research and development group. Because everyone in here is reading things, seeing things, playing with tools that the rest of us might not even know exist. So last year about this time we did lightning talks. I believe you did one, a bunch of other people did them. They were fantastic. So we're not going to do lightning talks this year, at least for a couple months. But if you have a tool or an API that you found recently that you think is awesome, would anyone care to stand up and tell us about it? You want to kick us off, Mark?
I actually just missed your last sentence.
So if anyone has a tool or an API that you found recently that you think is useful, you want to give us a quick overview of it. You want to kick us off?
Sure. I'm building a tool. It's called Stoplight. It solves, I'm going to talk to Jason after this because I'm trying to solve like almost everything that just came up in that talk. It's built on open standards like JSON schema, Swagger, RAML. It does the contract testing. It has some Postman-like capabilities in it. It does auto documentation of your API by watching your traffic and automatically validating your traffic against your specs. It's a lot of other really cool stuff it does. And if you want to learn more, you can talk to me after.
And it's currently in beta, correct?
It's currently, even before beta, it's not even public right now. It's like alpha, but I can get it into people's hands.
You literally have to talk to him.
You literally have to talk to me, yes.
Unless you're a good Googler. But
exactly. Yep.
Cool.
Stoplight.io. You can, all that's there is just an image, but you can certainly put in your email or just talk to me. It's just an email
share?
capture right now.
Who else wants to share something? Yeah, go ahead.
Quick show of hands, who hasn't heard of HTTPy? If you use curl, and every time you use curl you have to read the man page, you should definitely check out HTTPy.
I just had this discussion yesterday at work. And like all the curlers, I've always hated curl. Like, HTTPy.
Curl is a four-letter word. Anybody else?
If you use Emacs, there's a REST client that does a lot of this curl stuff for you. You can just type in the request directly, and it even has a nice little feature to copy the command to curl so that you can share it with other people that don't happen to use Emacs or the REST client.
Do you know the name of that plugin or how to find it?
It's called the Emacs REST client.
Oh, it's called the Emacs REST client. It's tricky that way, okay? So one thing that I've been doing, Jason mentioned BDD, behavior-driven development. I'm doing a bunch of stuff using BHAT, which is the BDD tool in the PHP community, to do a bunch of like spec testing for our API, and we're releasing all that open source hopefully later this month. We were trying to get it out last month, but last month ended yesterday, and I didn't make it. So, I'm in charge of the whole thing, so it's lots of fun. Do you have one?
30 days.
Yeah, I've got 30 days now. That's plenty of time. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
More of a question. Does anyone use MashShapes get-com, that API management tool, and have any experience with that?
Been thinking and playing with it a lot.
What do you think about that?
The big pushback from most devs that want to try to look at using it is having to deal with Lua all the time. So if you want to write plugins and stuff, you got to deal with
MashShapes, yeah, developer portal, control panel.
What would you recommend in place of that for an API management tool?
Fill out your checkbook and call the vendors.
3Scale has a version that you can get started with for free.
There's actually, they all have free tiers, but it's a question of like, if you plan to grow, pay attention to where the paid tier starts and how big it is.
So that's why I was looking for
the
someone.
sticker shock when you hit the paid tier. It's kind of
Correct.
scary.
So what open source API management?
It's
tool?
actually, that's definitely like an area of development going on right now. I think the MashShape guys were super brave in putting out the Kong thing, and it seems to be growing very well. There are not a lot of other like turnkey solutions. Most of them are go out and put together the 5 or 6 or 10 pieces you need to make that happen and write half of it yourself.
How about the APG's A127?
A127.
Oh, APGA's thing. Yeah.
Oh,
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, you're fundamentally tying yourself into the APGA thing, right? As you grow, you're going to get to the point where you're going to fall into that.
And a quick overview of the other tools. There's APGA, which went public last month or month before, relatively recently. There's 3Scale, which has they're like very API focused in the first place. Like you plug their stuff into that. There is Mastery, which is now owned by Intel. There is
IBM does a thing.
IBM does a thing. Is that through Watson or is it Lumix or
No, it's
Lumix?
I think it's on top of
Cloud. One of IBM has a ton of products.
Ask Andy Thurai.
Let's see, what else is there? Does MuleSoft have one? I've not
Anypoint.
Yeah.
Anypoint. Del Boomi. I don't know if that's related to this stuff, really.
Not familiar with it.
That's the big one.
Yeah, that's a bit.
Okay. What other tools have people found recently? Oh, welcome.
I'm writing an API right now using a closure library called Liberator. It's based heavily on Erlang language, and it's got all kinds of really cool tools for developing an API. And if you'd like to learn more about it, I'll be presenting it here in 2 weeks.
Here as in
this room in the closure meetup. Yeah.
Closure meetup. Okay.
2 weeks from now.
I was gonna say like here, like okay. What else? You mentioned Postman. What's Postman, just for the people who aren't familiar with it?
It's a GUI-based tool for making API calls. And you can build collections and save them, use them again, share them.
And it sits within Chrome.
Yeah.
They actually just released a client for that, or I don't know if it's this, but they released a client application for that, and there's a lot of things you can set up so you can basically put all your run tests, so you can use it for testing too, and so that they've been doing a lot of work on Postman.
Cool. Yeah, they just raised 1.5 million in May, and grown the team from 8 to 16 people, I think, recently. So looks like they're going all in on it.
Yeah.
Do you have one?
Not so new, but RunScope. Sorry.
RunScope. What's RunScope?
RunScope is similar. Like it allows you to make API calls, but you can have them scheduled and triggered. So plug it into your continuous integration, make sure everything's still functioning.
It has a 3-tier, but you do have to pay at some point, but it's not horribly expensive if you're really expensive. And it's a good monitoring solution.
I'm sorry, what was that one again?
Run scope.
Thank you.
And they're really good guys.
Are you here in Austin?
No, San Francisco based.
They'll be here soon.
John comes out about once a year, right? Sheehan? Yeah. The CEO comes out here every fall, not super often. What cool APIs have you discovered recently? One that I've been playing with recently is Context.io. Is anyone familiar with it? It's an API for your inbox. So if you want to like extract contact lists or attachments or like catch messages when they're incoming. Like I did a hack with them a while back where it would monitor my inbox, and if I got emails from certain people, it would go ahead and use Twilio to send me a text message. If it was other people, it'd use Twilio and read me the message. That was kind of cool. APIs, anybody? Going once? Going twice?
I'll just go with Parse, just because that's an API I've been using really heavily on the mobile app side. So I've been using that really heavily with their local data storage support. So you can basically have like a copy of your offline database locally on your mobile app with an offline connection. Ran into a whole bunch of problems with that. So if you're doing something with like a lot of data, I think it's not really a good choice right now. But it works really well for cases where your queries are really simple and such.
Do you push notifications too?
Yes.
Yeah, Parse is owned by Facebook.
It is.
So it's got pretty good backing. You guys have heard of Facebook, right? Yeah. Facebook does have some news coming out about another API. None of it's good, so stay tuned. I don't think it's quite yet public, but stay tuned. None of it's good at all. Does anyone use the Facebook API? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Okay, cool. With that, I guess we're done. No? No, we're not done.
No, that was the yes.
Okay, that was like a no. Okay, so nobody has to leave. We still have beer, we still have water, soda, and everything like that. Please meet some new people. Everyone here is really fired up about APIs. We've got a lot of big companies, small companies, startups all over represented here. So meet some new people. Do you have something to say?
Do y'all field requests for future lightning talks? Just like put out a feeler if anyone has any experience in it?
So we've got the next 2 meetups scheduled. Do you want to go ahead and say lightning talks for what, September? Oh, this is July, so August and October? All right, lightning talks for October. All right, yes, we do. What do you want to hear about?
If anyone's used Seneca, which is a Node.js thing for writing microframeworks, it touts itself as a thing where you can start writing a monolith, and then as it gets too big, you can start fracturing off microservices. So it sounds very interesting, but I don't have any experience with it yet. But if someone else has experience with it, I'd love to hear it.
You've got 3 months to get experience with it. All right, thank you everybody. Please make yourselves comfortable, hang out, chat with people, say hello to somebody. Thank you.